declarations of interest?
No, not from me anyway.
No, thank you. And then we come to the minutes held on the 6th of July. Can I sign these as a true and accurate record? Are you all happy with these?
I think they'll look accurate. Yes.
Agreed.
Okay, if I don't hear anything to the contrary.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Right.
Can I just make an observation, Elizabeth?
Yes, please do.
It started at 5:30 and finished at 5:45. That was commendable. I say no more.
Well, we'll see. We do want to do things properly as well, but if we can manage to get through things properly and succinctly, that's always a good way to go, isn't it? Okay, so can we turn to the next item on the agenda, which is the review of contract regulations? Can I ask David Hughes here?
I am, Chair. I am.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
I'm just going to say a few words because it's quite a technical.
Indeed.
A technical report, the proposed amendments that you wish to make.
Indeed, thank you. So, colleagues, members may remember that in the summer, the leadership team approved the procurement strategy and contract management framework. So we've now been working with legal services to review the contract regulations to make sure that they're fit for purpose and lined up with the Constitution. And we've also developed a procurement code to provide practical support and advice to officers to ensure that they're able to comply with the contract regulations and other council requirements. So, in terms of contract regulations, we've sought to make sure there's greater clarity in respect of roles and responsibilities and recording procurement actions and decisions, ensuring there's proper consideration and early engagement with lead members, and documenting decisions relating to procurement strategy for future procurements, being clear about the parameters for approving waivers and extensions, particularly, which have been, I know, an issue for lead members in the past in terms of the numbers of those coming through and when they come through, and also variations and novations, and making sure that lead members are involved in those discussions and decisions appropriately, that we've got good forward planning to make sure we reduce the instances of waivers and extensions, and that we're clear about how and where competition should be used and how those decisions should be made in line with the thresholds in the Constitution. And so the procurement code is very much a how-to guide for officers to make sure that they can carry out their roles effectively, that they're given guidance throughout the whole aspect of the procurement process and council's requirements, including managing conflicts of interest and transparency, that we're encouraging officers to look at options to procure, including frameworks and collaborative procurement, and we're promoting the council policies and objectives around things like London Living Wage, use of local suppliers and SMEs. Basically following, if you're happy to approve the contract regulations, we'll be looking to make sure there's a good programme of training for officers covering both the contract regs and the procurement code, and we'll be reporting back to members regularly on compliance with the contract regs through our assurance reporting on procurement to the Audit and Transparency Committee. So I'm happy to pause there and take any questions.
Thank you. That all sounds excellent. Now, who's got any questions?
I have, if I may.
Yes, of
Chair.
course.
This looks an eminently better effort document than the one Andy Rinker and I in particular scrutinised back in 2015-16. So just a few comments. We have two codes, of course. We've got the Westminster Code of Practice and the Rbkc Code of Practice. And the reason I point that out is because back in the day, back in 2015, because we're always doing call-offs, we were doing call-offs, of course, of Westminster as the lead borough when they were the lead borough. And it was unclear which code of practice we were working to. Were we working to their strategy or our strategy? And sometimes we were working to their strategy and sometimes working to no strategy. So if we're doing call-offs with Westminster or these pre-competed on the pre-competed frameworks, will we be working under the Rbkc Code of Practice? If I just do all my questions now, then we're finished. There's quite a lot to say about this, but I won't. I'll just do so. There's that, which is an important one because it means we can agree a code of practice here, but be working off another council's code of practice. Secondly, on the on 3.12, where it talks about pre-competed frameworks, and of course the reason, quite reasonably, is that if you use pre-competed frameworks, that it means that you don't have to go through the open competition process, and therefore it will reduce the amount of resources you use financially and officer-wise. And when we did the procurement scrutiny, one of the in fact, it was Andy Rinker that raised the issue that sometimes these pre-competed frameworks don't always give you the advantage that you think it will. And of course, if you go onto these call-offs, you're of course stuck with the clauses in the framework. You sign up to it and you take whatever they agreed. I assume that we will not get stuck with adverse clauses. The final one, I picked out 3, but there's many more, but we won't go through that, is one of the, in the main contract, there's no paper, there's no numbers on the paper, but 6 pages in, it talks about inclusion of local and small and medium and SMEs. And we took evidence in our procurement scrutiny from the Kensington Chelsea Social Council, and Angela Spence, and I forget, she brought a couple of officers with her, and they were one of the organisations complaining about not being able to enter the competition because it was simply far too complicated, etc. And I see the inclusion here is that, of course, we're required to do it as part of the tendering guidance. But I have a feeling that this is put in here without it's almost as if we're offering it, but it's going to be very difficult to provide it. It says in the second paragraph to obtain more details about the established programs of obviously entering SMEs. The councillors, we should look at the database and contact the economic development team for more information. I would have thought we should have been given that here now. I would have thought so, because we had a policy then and have a policy now of trying to make more accessible. We obviously won't be able to do it with, as it says, with specialism. I mean, obviously, if it's very specialist knowledge contracts, we won't be able to give it to them. But they mentioned all sorts of different contracts. The Kensington Chelsea Social Council in particular did, that they said they would have liked to enter either in partnership with other organisations, but they just couldn't do it because of the complexity of trying to do it. I'm no further forward with this paragraph about how we would do it, how we'd give them the ability to do it, and what the economic development team. I would like to know what the economic development team, how they're going to realise this, because they're going to come back at you on this one, Leader.
Okay. So, Mr. Hughes, I guess there are 3 things that Councillor Mason was asking. One about whether we use the Rbkc or the Westminster Code of Practice. Second thing was about pre-compete frameworks, and the third thing was about how we include SMEs. How would we actually help them to bid for contracts?
Indeed, happy to pick up on those points, Chair. So on the first point, so this is an Rbkc procurement code. This will apply to all sovereign procurements that are carried out for Rbkc. We also work closely with our procurement colleagues in Westminster, who for the by-borough service procurement. So what we're putting in place are arrangements which make sure that the appropriate code is followed, but that lead members in both authorities are involved at all key stages of the process, both in terms of procurement strategy and when it gets further down the line in terms of contract award and reviewing contractor performance. So I think it's really important that actually there's that engagement across both authorities. The structure that we're putting in place for the procurement team includes business partnering, which includes a direct link to the business partner for adults and children's in the by-borough services. So again, having that much closer coordination and working with colleagues in the by-borough services to make sure that we are approaching in the right way, but we're involving lead members and members particularly in the procurement process at all stages, particularly where there are shared service arrangements in place. On the second point, in terms of pre-procured frameworks, so what we're not saying is that officers must use frameworks. What we're saying is they must carry out a full appraisal of options for procurement, which includes frameworks. So this is again where in the past there hasn't been really good documentation to support that thorough analysis of all the options available. So officers must be satisfied, and in discussions with lead members, that a framework is the right way to approach a particular procurement for the service or the goods that they're looking to procure, rather than saying it's an easy route, because there is a danger, as Councillor Mason says, of seeing it as an easy route to avoid having to go through competition ourselves when somebody else has already done the hard work in terms of competition. So this is very much about how we look at the different alternative procurement routes we have and which best suits the procurement we're looking to undertake. And particularly then around the sort of engaging with SMEs. So we are working closely with the economic development team to implement a number of actions in the local economy strategy, and part of that is looking at how we engage with local suppliers and SMEs to make sure that we make the procurement process more accessible for them going forward, how we either directly in terms of then winning contracts directly with the council, or in terms of consortium or group bids where we encourage larger suppliers to look to use local supply chains and SMEs as well in terms of their bids and proposals. And this is work that is ongoing in the development of the social value strategy, which will be coming back to leadership team in the next few months in terms of how we develop those. So it's not just about putting something in the procurement code that says we should do it, it's how do we in practice engage with our local businesses and local supply chain to make sure we make the council accessible to them in terms of how they can win future work with the council.
Thank you. Councillor Kamali and then Councillor Lindsay.
Thank you, and thank you, David, for this. Having just gone through the waste contract procurement, I know how important a good procurement strategy is. One thing I just want to follow up on is Appendix C, which is the Amazon business rules. You know, in the current climate where we're trying to support our high streets as much as possible, and we're campaigning to shop local, it occurs to me that we're offering our council employees free access to Amazon Prime through our sort of agreement with Amazon. And obviously I fully appreciate that Amazon is a mighty logistics machine, but at what point will we sort of review whether or not Amazon is actually the right place to get smaller items that we should be buying from our own high streets or from local businesses?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's something, Councillor Kamali, we will be keeping under constant review. It's something that we've advocated in a small number of areas through the COVID crisis so far, and so the emergency work we've been doing, particularly in the early days when all authorities were struggling to purchase PPE for staff and for care settings. But it's something we will keep under regular review, because you're right, we want to make sure what we don't do is encourage lots of Amazon purchases against those purchases which can be made locally.
So David, so what you're saying is most of the things that we buy on that Amazon thing are things like PPE. They're not. They've been for
urgent purchases, indeed, and we can look at how we sharpen and shape that up. Yeah.
Councillor Kamali's what he's just said is very valid.
It is.
Councillor David Lindsay.
Thank you, David. On page 3 of the report, under 3.7, the first two sentences read: the process by which contracts or requirements values are to be estimated is updated to more closely reflect the approach within the OJEU regulations. It specifically splits out the different spend types within the OJEU regulations as they have different thresholds. Clearly this is to do with Brexit and the erstwhile regime under which we were obliged to operate. Given that we are leaving the EU, surely one of the advantages that we have is that we are no longer need to be bound by their criteria. And could you just expand a little bit more on what you have and on what you're getting at? Because clearly it may be that actually the thresholds and so on that they have stipulated are sensible, but that is not necessarily the case in a new regime.
No, indeed, absolutely, Councillor Lindsay. So on the first point, we're working on the basis that, as things stand, government have signalled previously their intention to basically translate the current EU regulations into UK law. But that's not something that we have had further information on yet. So we're likely to have the same sort of framework and arrangements in place beyond the end of the calendar year. But on your second point, we've been trying to be clear about the different requirements for goods, services and construction related contracts to make absolutely clear to officers the different thresholds that apply and the different levels of governance and scrutiny that are required by officers, executive directors and members in those cases, to be absolutely clear to officers what's required in terms of decision making. But we will undoubtedly need to review the contract regulations in light of any changes government brings forward in terms of legislation over the next few months.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Pat Mason.
Yes, Chair. I was going to follow up on Councillor Kamali's Amazon question, because I was going to raise that anyway, because not only do they pay very, very little tax in this country, but unless we stipulate to officers what we may be using them for, people can get into the habit of just using a particular supplier for everything, and they have a very large catalogue, and they will be sucking business away from our local, our own local businesses. So unless we've got some procedure to actually make that happen, it's quite likely officers will just use them for everything. Secondly, just to come back on the procurement codes, and the reason I asked about the two procurement codes, Westminster and Kensington Chelsea, and I'm glad that if officers are going to work together, we found when we did and this wasn't immediately evident to us when we started doing the scrutiny, was that a lot of the problems happened because if one borough was leading, nobody quite knew which code to use. And sometimes the lead member on the cabinet in that particular borough just assumed that, of course, they would use their code and not ours. And sometimes, so there was a real problem with trying to work out whose code you should use. And we had produced a procurement strategy which didn't fit across by or at that time tri-borough. So effectively, unless you had some kind of procedure, and I hope there is a procedure, the officers had to make it up, basically. They had to make it up on contracts because the two codes didn't fit together, and they were trying to apply them. So lead members talking to each other might not answer the question. They may still be trying to work out how to make it fit.
Indeed.
Thank you.
So that's very helpful, Councillor Mason. So if I come back on the Amazon point first, so a couple of things. So we have the way we've set up the Amazon arrangements is that the strategic procurement team actually have oversight of all activity used on the Amazon business cards. So we will be monitoring and are monitoring that to make sure there's no inappropriate expenditure going on. I think given the steer the committee have given, I'm happy that we go away and amend the procurement code to reflect what you've said, that we look at it being for urgent supply only where local supply isn't possible. And I'm happy to go away and amend that, because I think that's a very helpful suggestion that's been made by the committee. On the code, so in terms of to give Councillor Mason some assurance going forward about the by-borough procurements and which code is in use, we are with Councillor Wheel developing a robust procurement forward plan, which will include not only sovereign contracts, but by-borough contracts as well. So we will be clear in that procurement forward plan, which each lead member will get and will be reported to the leadership team periodically. We'll see exactly who is responsible for leading the procurement and which procurement code therefore applies. So there's absolute clarity in all cases as to which code is being used to carry out a procurement.
Thank you. And are there any other questions or any other comments from anyone? And if not, we're being asked to seek the Council's approval to approve the updating of the contract regulations within the Constitution, forming part of the operation framework for Rbkc. And we're being asked to delegate authority to the Director of Internal Audit and Fraud to approve the procurement code. Are we all happy with that?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yes.
No, thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you very much. And if we can go on to the next item on the agenda, which is the reports recommending revisions to the Constitution and their adoption at the Council on the 21st of October. And it's really about licensing. So I don't know who's speaking to this, if anyone. Seemed to be pretty straightforward. Jem, do you want to come in on this?
Oh, I just heard a voice there. I don't know if
who is the voice?
Hello, I'm here if there are any questions.
Okay.
It's not just licensing. It's not just licensing, Chair. There's another item, I think.
Yes, there's a pension fund as well. The Business and Planning Act and
questions, Council,
and the pension fund. So, should we start with the? Let's start at the beginning. Sorry, you're quite right, Councillor Mason. I'd rather jumped in the middle rather than start at the beginning. So if we look at proposed change to the Council standing orders in respect of questions to lead members, I'm going to ask the same first question, which is 1.3. The Council agenda is published on a Tuesday in the week before, and any questions submitted after state won't be in the agenda paper. So they'll then have to be published separately. So my question is there a cost attached to this?
No, not a significant cost. It would the questions be circulated electronically, so I don't envisage that we would be printing.
Fine, thank you. Councillor Mason.
Well, I don't see why we shouldn't allow it. They're saying it's too long a time frame. The Friday before the Wednesday, that seems reasonable. Is that what we're going to agree?
Yes, is that everyone feels that that's acceptable? Friday before the Wednesday.
Friday before the Wednesday,
yeah.
Sounds
okay,
nice.
Good, that's great. Right, let's go on to the next thing. Now it's about the Business and Planning Act, and it's to amend the process for determining pavement licences, relying on the previous procedure, and really to simplify it. So that the terms of reference of the licensing committed is amended. So it just says the determination of pavement licenses under the Business and Planning Act 2020, and it's proposed to add the delegations to the Director of Transport, Highways, Parks and Leisure to determine all pavement licence applications, whether they're contested or uncontested, and to determine all highway functions unless they're specifically to be determined by the licensing subcommittee. That seems pretty straightforward. It's really reacting to the change in laws with the Business and Planning Act 2020. So it's just altering the Constitution so it reflects that.
Can I ask under 2.6? Am I right thinking it says that if 3 or more objections are received and there is not time for an application to be considered by the committee, then the chair or it would be there'll be no committee hearing, presumably. Is everyone going to be happy with that?
Levan, do you want to come in, or Jem?
There might be objectors or not out there who are unhappy that we're making a decision.
I don't think the new regulations allow for that. But Jem, perhaps you'd like to come.
Okay.
Well, just to really add that the purpose of the Business and Planning Act was to really speed up the use of the pavement to react to coronavirus and to make sure that the social distancing could be maintained. What we found at the beginning was that the time frames that we as a council operated under meant that by the time an application were to be able to come to committee, it had actually already passed its statutory time frame by which it had to be granted in any case. So what this is basically doing is allowing us to be a bit more nimble. But of course, as with every license, we can always, if there are many objectors, we can still work through that with the residents as well.
Oh, this is highway seating, isn't it? This is highway seating we're talking about. Sorry, yeah, I thought it was. I was thinking about tables and chairs.
I think this is what it's doing. It's just reflecting what the reality is.
All right.
It's just changing. The proposed changes to the Constitution to reflect the reality that has happened because of the Business and Highway and the Planning Act.
My head was in tables and chairs, I'm afraid. I understand now, yes. I get it.
It is about tables and chairs because it's about external seating as well.
Yes, I understand.
Good. So we're all happy with that?
Okay, agreed.
Yes.
Agreed?
Agreed.
Nobody disagreeing? No stray hands up. And then finally, the pension fund. There's proposed changes to functions delegated to officers, and there's a whole lot here. And please note 3.6 that the chair of the investment committee has been consulted on these proposals, and he's happy with them.
Chair, sorry to come in. That paragraph was withdrawn because Councillor Mitchell hadn't. So
he doesn't approve of them.
Well, I think he will do, but it'll come to the next meeting. I didn't have time to get his approval before this meeting, so the paragraph was withdrawn from the papers that were circulated. So my apologies if you're looking.
Okay, I had them highlighted, which is why I drew attention to them.
It will come back, but it'll come back to the next meeting.
Okay. What? So this whole thing is coming back to the next meeting?
That particular paragraph on the pension fund, yes, will come back to the next meeting.
Oh, okay. So we're not deciding this tonight?
Not tonight, thank you. No.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Okay. Well, on that basis, we've made the decision on the change to the constitutions in paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. Paragraph 3 will come back to a further meeting. Thank you. Is there any other business or anything that we have not done that we should have done?
Thank you.
No?
5, I think.
Good. Thank you very much then. I declare the meeting closed, and thank you very much for coming.
I thought A5 is still included.
Sorry, Councillor Bakhtiar, you wish to say something?
The papers I have received is paper A5 included, change of constitution, about questions to league members.
Ah, yes, we discussed that, but perhaps I didn't come to you. What would you like to add?
Oh, well, did I miss that?
Apparently.
Oh, I'm really sorry.
We agreed it, but I'm very happy to take your comments.
So what was agreed, please?
What was agreed is what it says in the paper.
2 days?
No, that the council agenda is published on a Tuesday, and that any questions to lead members should be printed or sent round on the Friday before the council meeting on the Wednesday.
So that's a week.
It's not a week. It's 1, 2, 3 days, working days.
3 working
Okay.
Depends on what time they do it on the Friday.
Because there was an option of 2 days, 2 working days. I was in favor of that one, but I missed it. Here we go.
Is there an option of 2 days?
I think.
There's just 2 days for the week, normally on the Friday before the Wednesday. Not later than 10 a.m., 2 clear working days, i.e. normally on the Friday before the Wednesday meeting. That's what we agreed. So we're agreeing with what you wished us to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you at our next meeting.